Hello. Welcome to my live reading session. Today we'll be going through the opening chapters of How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, an international bestseller read by 30 million people worldwide, a timeless bestseller since 1936, the only book you'll ever need to lead you to success. And we'll go over the back cover here. This book will help you solve one of the biggest problems you face: how to get along with and influence people in your daily business and social life. Since it was first published in 1936, Dale Carnegie's all-time classic has been translated into almost every known language and continues to help millions of readers around the world. How to Win Friends and Influence People can help you achieve these important goals. Get out of the mental rut, think new thoughts, acquire new visions, discover new ambitions. Make friends easily and quickly. Increase your popularity. Win people to your way of thinking. Increase your influence, your prestige. Handle complaints, avoid arguments. Become a better speaker and more entertaining conversationalist. And personally, these are some skills that I really do want to develop for myself, especially when it comes to the online domain. Hopefully the audio comes through clearly. I am using a somewhat old laptop with not a very good audio setup. So if you do join this, I will be going through this multiple times as well in live discussions and reading it live each chapter until I've got this book down to its core. I won't be going into the history and the backstory of this book and how influential it is. For this live session, I want to just get through the book first time, because I've had this book on my shelf for so long and never bothered to actually go through it, which is stupid because I have all these great resources around me and, just not using them to my advantage, not taking advantage of the fact that I have all these amazing titles around me. And I believe this will help me with my YouTube platform, growing a bit of confidence in front of the camera as well, which is something that I sorely lack and wish to improve on. So if you are just joining now, I will be starting with the opening chapters. Of course, this version was published by HarperCollins Publishers, Australia, because in my country, we get all our books from Australia. All right. This book is dedicated to a man who doesn't need to read it, my cherished friend, Homer Croy. Oh, that's lovely. Okay, then we have our contents, and I'll try to go for about 1 to 2 hours on this live. Hopefully we attract a bit of a following as well. Okay, so this is in 4 sections. And then there's obviously courses, personal techniques, and an index. And it's about 295 to 300 pages in total, not including the index and the 4 pages. So we'll start by the preface. How to Win Friends. Preface to the revised edition. How to Win Friends and Influence People was first published in 1937. In an edition of only 5,000 copies, neither Dale Carnegie nor the publishers, Simon & Schuster, anticipated more than this modest sale. To their amazement, the book had become an overnight sensation, and edition after edition rolled off the presses to keep up with the increasing public demand. How to Win Friends and Influence People took its place in publishing history as one of the all-time international bestsellers. It touched a nerve and filled a human need that was more than a faddish phenomenon of post-Depression days. As evidenced by its continued and uninterrupted sales into the 80s, almost half a century later. Dale Carnegie used to say that it was easier to make $1 million than to put a phrase into the English language. How to Win Friends and Influence People became such a phrase, quoted, paraphrased, parodied, used in innumerable contexts, from political cartoon to novels. The book itself was translated into almost every known written language, Each generation has discovered it anew and found it relevant. Which brings us to the logical question. Why revise a book that has proven and continues to prove its vigorous and universal appeal? Why tamper with success? To answer that, we must realize that Dale Carnegie himself was a tireless reviser of his own work during his lifetime. How to Win Friends and Influence People was written to be used as a textbook for his courses in effective speaking and human relations. And it is still used in those courses today. Until his death in 1955, he constantly improved and revised the course itself to make it applicable to the evolving needs of an ever-growing public. No one was more sensitive to the changing currents of present-day life than Dale Carnegie. He constantly improved and refined his methods of teaching. He updated his book on effective speaking several times. Had he lived longer, he himself would have revised How to Win Friends and Influence People to better reflect the changes that have taken place in the world since the 30s. Many of the names and prominent people in the book, well known at the time of first publication, are no longer recognized by many of today's readers. Certain examples and phrases seem as quaint and dated in our social climate as those in the Victorian novel. The important message and overall impact of the book is weakened to that extent. Our purpose, therefore, in this revision is to clarify and strengthen the book for a modern reader without tampering with the content. We have not changed how to win friends and influence people, except to make a few excisions and add a few contemporary examples. The brash, breezy Carnegie style is intact. Even the 30s slang is still there. Dale Carnegie wrote as he spoke in an intensively exuberant, colloquial, and conversational manner. So his voice still speaks as forcefully as ever in the book and in his work. Thousands of people all over the world have been trained in Carnegie courses, and increasing numbers each year. And other thousands are reading and studying How to Win Friends and Influence People, and being inspired to use its principles to better their lives. To all of them, we offer this revision in the spirit of honoring, of honing and polishing this of a finely made tool, Dorothy Carnegie, Ms. Dale Carnegie. Okay. So in the preface, we have learned that this book was written in the 1930s and has its own course that has been constantly improved through the decades. Next section. How this book was written and why, by Dale Carnegie. During the first 35 years of the 20th century, the publishing houses of America printed more than 1/5 different books. Most of them were deadly dull, and many were financial failures. Many, did I say? The president of one of the largest publishing houses in the world confessed to me that his company, after 75 years of publishing experience, still lost money on 7 out of every 8 books it published. Why then did I have the temerity to write another book? And after I'd written it, why should we bother to read it? Fair questions both, and I'll try answering them. I have since 1912 been conducting educational courses for business and professional men and women in New York. At first, I conducted courses in public speaking, only courses designed to train adults by actual experience, to think on their feet and express their ideas with more clarity, more effectiveness, and more poise, both in business interviews and before groups. But gradually, as the seasons passed, I realized that as sorely as these adults needed training in effective speaking, they needed still more training in the fine art of getting along with people in everyday business and social contacts. I also gradually realized that I was sorely in need of such training myself. As I look back across the years, I am appalled at my own frequent lack of finesse and understanding. How I wish a book such as this had been placed in my hands 20 years ago. What a priceless boon it would have been. Dealing with people is probably the biggest problem you face, especially if you are in business. Yes, and that is also true if you're a housewife, architect, or engineer. Research done a few years ago under the auspices of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching uncovered a most important and significant fact. A fact later confirmed by the additional studies made at the Carnegie Institute of Technology. These Investigations revealed that even in such technical lines as engineering, about 15% of one's financial success is due to one's technical knowledge, and about 85% is due to the skill in human engineering, to personality and the ability to lead people. For many years, I conducted courses each season at the Engineers Club of Philadelphia, and also courses in New York chapter of American Institute of Electrical Engineers. A total of probably more than 1,500 engineers have passed through my classes. They came to me because they finally realized, after years of observation and experience, that the highest paid personnel in engineering are frequently not those who know the most about engineering. One can, for example, hire mere technical ability in engineering, accountancy, architecture, and any other profession at nominal salaries. But the person who has technical knowledge plus the ability to express ideas, to assume leadership and to arouse enthusiasm among people, that person is headed for higher earning power. In the heyday of his activity, John D. Rockefeller said that the ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee. And I will pay more for that ability, said John D., than for any other under the sun. Wouldn't you suppose that every colleague in the land would conduct courses to develop the highest priced ability under the sun? But what if there is just one practical common sense course of that kind given for adults that even one colleague in the land has escaped my attention? Hold on, let me go past that again. But if there was just one practical common sense course of that kind given for adults and even one colleague in the land, it has escaped my attention up to the present writing. The University of Chicago and the United YMCA schools conducted a survey to determine what adults want to study. The survey cost $25,000 and took 2 years. The last part of the survey was made in Meriden, Connecticut. It had been chosen as a typical American town. Every adult in Meriden was interviewed and requested to answer 156 questions. Questions such as, what is your business or profession, your education? How do you spend your spare time? What is your income, hobbies, your ambitions, your problems? What subjects are you most interested in studying, and so on? That survey revealed that health is the prime interest of adults, and that the second interest is people, how to understand and get along with people, how to make people like you, how to win others to your way of thinking. So the committee conducted his survey, resolved to conduct such a course for adults in Meriden. They searched diligently for a practical textbook on the subject and found not one. Finally, they approached one of the world's outstanding authorities on adult education and asked if they knew of any book that meets the needs of this group. No, he replied, I know what those adults want, but the book they need has never been written. I knew from my experience that the statement was true, for I myself had been searching for years to discover a practical, working handbook on human relations. Since no such book existed, I have tried to write one for use in my own courses, and here it is. I hope you like it. In preparation for the book, I read everything that I could find on the subject, everything from newspaper columns, magazine articles, records of the family courts, and writings on old philosophers and new psychologists. In addition, I hired a trained researcher to spend 1.5 years in various libraries reading everything I had missed. Plowing through the erudite tomes on psychology, poring over hundreds of magazine articles, searching through countless biographies, trying to ascertain how the great leaders of all ages had dealt with people. We read their biographies. We read the life stories of all great leaders from Julius Caesar to Thomas Edison. I recall that we read over 100 biographies of Theodore Roosevelt alone. We are determined to spare no time, no expense, to discover every practical idea that anyone had ever used throughout the ages for winning friends and influencing people. I personally interviewed scores of successful people, some of them world-famous inventors like Marconi and Edison, political leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt and James Farley, business leaders like Owen D. Young, movie stars like Clark Gable and Mark Pickford, the explorers like Martin Johnson, and tried to discover the techniques that they used in human relations. From all this material, I prepared a short talk. I called it How to Win Friends and Influence People. I say short, it was short in the beginning, but it soon expanded to a lecture that consumed an hour and 30 minutes. For years, I gave this talk each season to the adults in Carnegie Institutes at the Carnegie Institute courses in New York. I gave the talk and urged the listeners to go out and test it in their business and social contexts, and then came back to class and speak about their experiences and result that they achieved. And the results that they had achieved. What an interesting assignment. These men and women, hungry for self-improvement, were fascinated by the idea of working in a new kind of laboratory, the first and only laboratory of human relationships for adults that have ever existed. This book wasn't written in the usual sense of the word. It grew as a child grows. It grew and developed out of that laboratory, out of the experiences of thousands of adults. Years ago, we started with a set of rules printed on a card no larger than a postcard. The next season, we printed a larger card, then a leaflet, then a series of booklets, each one expanding in size and scope. After 15 years of experiment and research came this book. Hold on, just excuse me for a moment. I just need to mute a couple of chats on my screen here. Just go mute. Okay, that should take care of that. Excuse me for just a moment. I will just be preparing some coffee and some tea for myself because my voice, I'm not used to speaking for such duration on a book. So I will just be leaving to make myself some tea, and I will return in a few moments. Also, don't mind this in the background. That's just my bed. All right. Just got the tea ready here. Let's stay for a bit. All right. Now, where were we? So as I can see, I'm still the only person in this lobby, but oh, there goes my tea. So I'm drinking gunpowder green tea today. It's quite a delicious variety of green tea. All right. The rules that we set down here were not mere theories or guesswork. They work like magic, incredible as it sounds. I have seen the application of these principles literally revolutionize the lives of many people. To illustrate, a man with 314 employees joined one of these courses. For years, he had driven and criticized and condemned his employees without stint or discretion. Kindness, words of appreciation, and encouragement were alien to his lips. After studying the principles discussed in this book, this employer sharply altered his philosophy of life. His organization is now inspired with new loyalty and a new enthusiasm, a new spirit of teamwork. 314 enemies have been turned into 314 friends. As he proudly said in a speech before the class, when I used to walk through the establishment, no one greeted me. My employees actually looked the other way when they saw me approaching. But now they're all my friends, and even the janitor calls me by my first name. This employer gained more profit, more leisure, and what is infinitely more important, he found far more happiness in his business and in his home. Countless numbers of salespeople have sharply increased their sales by the use of these principles. Many have opened up new accounts that have had formerly solicited in vain. Executives have been... Hold on, I've lost my place. Executives have been given increased authority, increased pay. One executive reported a large increase in salary because he applied these truths. Another, an executive in Philadelphia Gasworks Company, is slated for demolition when he was 65 because of his belligerence. Because of this inability to lead people skillfully, the training not only saved him from the demotion, but brought him a promotion with increased pay. On innumerable occasions, spouses attending the banquet given at the end of the course have told me that their homes have been much happier since their husbands or wives started this training. People are frequently astonished by the results they achieve. It all seems like magic. In some cases, their enthusiasm, they had telephoned me at my home on Sundays because they couldn't wait 48 hours to report their achievements at a regular session of the course. One man was so stirred by the talk of these principles that he sat far into the night discussing them with other members of the class. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the others went home, but he was so shaken by the realization of his own mistakes, so inspired by the vista of a new and richer world opening before him, he was unable to sleep. He didn't sleep the night or the next day or the next night. Who was he? A naive, untrained individual ready to gush over any new theory that came along? No, far from it. He was a sophisticated, blasé dealer in art. Very much a man about town, he spoke 3 languages fluently and was a graduate of 2 European universities. While writing this chapter, I received a letter from a German of the old school, an aristocrat whose forebears had served for generations as professional army officers under the Hohenzollerns. I have to look up what that is. His letter, written from a transatlantic steamer, telling about the application of these principles, rose almost to a religious fervor. Another man, an old school New Yorker, a Harvard graduate, a wealthy man, the owner of a large carpet factory, declared that he had learned more in 14 weeks through this system of training about the fine art of influencing people than he had learned about the same subject during his 4 years of college. Absurd? Laughable? Fantastic? Of course, you are privileged to dismiss this statement with whatever adjective you wish. I am merely reporting without comment a declaration made by the conservative and eminently successful Harvard graduate in a public address to approximately 600 people at the Yale Club in New York on the evening of Thursday, February 23rd, 1933. Compared to what we ought to be, a famous Professor William James of Harvard, compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, a human individual thus lives far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts, which he habitually fails to use. Those powers, which you habitually fail to use, the sole purpose of this book is to help you discover, develop, and profit by those dormant and unused assets. Education, said by Dr. John G. Hibben, former president of Princeton University, is the ability to meet life situations. If by the time you're finished reading the first 3 chapters of this book, if you aren't then a little better equipped to meet life situations, then I shall consider this book to be a total failure. So far as you're concerned, for the great aim of education, said Herbert Spencer, is not knowledge, but action. And this is an action book. Dale Carnegie, 1936. Wow. And I really started to get a taste for his style of prose and diction. The way he speaks is, like I said earlier in the earlier chapter, the preface, that he does write in a way akin to how he speaks. And now that I've gone through a little bit of his book, I've begun to fall more in line with his words. So that is excellent. I'm so glad that I've gotten that far with his words. I probably shouldn't have put the tea on top of that there, but I have nowhere else to put it, so that tea bag's going there. And there is no sugar in this green tea, so I'm just going to take a little tea break. Oh, that's good. I should have put some honey in this. All right, so that is page 24 of How to Win Friends and Influence People. So we're about a 10th of the way through the book. The next chapter is called 9 Suggestions on How to Get the Most Out of This Book. I'll drink a little bit more tea, let it mull over in the comment section if anyone decides to join. Although I probably should have done this on TikTok, I would have gotten more people to join my live stream. But, I have to build content for my YouTube channel as well. And it looks like I will be getting through this in about 8 to 10 hours. So hopefully a few more people decide to show up here. There is a style of speaking for people in the 1930s. The sentences in English do tend to go a bit longer than the sort of modern 2010, 2020s style of speech that we have adopted, especially across so many different networks and social groups. There's no one distinct form of English anymore. People speak with their own slang and colloquialisms of which you have to be able to understand. I probably have my own, of which I'm trying to develop a stronger speaking voice for YouTube. All right. Page 25. 9 suggestions on how to get the most out of this book. 1. If you wish to get the most out of this book, there is one indispensable requirement, one essential, infinitely more important than any rule or technique. Unless you have this one fundamental requisite, 1,000 rules on how to study will avail little. And if you do have this cardinal endowment, then you can achieve wonders without reading any suggestions for getting the most out of this book. What is this requirement? What is this magic requirement? Just this: a deep driving desire to learn, a vigorous determination to increase your ability to deal with people. How can you develop such an urge? Be constantly reminding yourselves of how important these principles are to you. Picture yourself how their mastery will aid you in leading a richer, fuller, happier, and more fulfilling life. Say to yourself over and over, my popularity, my happiness, and a sense of worth depend to no small extent upon my skill in dealing with people. That is actually absolutely true. I'll get back to that again in a bit, but let's continue with this book. 2, read each chapter rapidly at first to get a bird's eye view of it. You will probably be tempted then to rush on to read the next one, but don't. Unless you are reading merely for entertainment, but if you're reading because you want to increase your skill in human relations, then go back and reread each chapter thoroughly. In the long run, this will mean saving time and getting results. 3, stop frequently in your reading to think over what you are reading. Ask yourself just how and when you can apply each suggestion. Well, I'll have to do that on the next reading because this is a live reading. If you do join and want to comment, please do. If you've already read the book, please give us a few pointers, but don't spoil anything. Next, 4, read with a crayon, pencil, pen, magic marker, or highlighter in your hand. When you come across a suggestion that you feel you can use, draw a line beside it. If it is a 4-star suggestion, then underscore every sentence or highlight it or mark it with a asterisk, 4 asterisks. Marking and underscoring a book makes it more interesting and far easier to review rapidly. Number 5. I knew a woman who had been an office manager for a large insurance concern for 15 years. Every month she read all the insurance contracts her employee had issued that month. Yes, she read many of the same contracts over month after month, year after year. Why? Because experience had taught her that was the only way she could keep their provisions clearly in mind. I once spent almost 2 years writing a book on public speaking, and yet I found I had to keep going back over it time to time in order to remember what I'd written in my own book. The rapidity with which we forget is astonishing. So if you want to get a real lasting benefit out of this book, don't imagine that skimming through it once will suffice. After reading it thoroughly, you ought to spend a few hours reviewing it every month. Keep it on your desk in front of you every day. Glance through it often. Keep constantly impressing yourself with the rich possibilities of improvement that still lie in the offing. Remember that the use of these principles can be made habitual only by constant and vigorous campaign of review and application. There is no other way. 6. Bernard Shaw once remarked, if you teach a man anything, he will never learn. Shaw was right. Learning is an active process. We learn by doing. So if you desire to master the principles you are studying in this book, do something about them. Apply these rules at every opportunity. If you don't, you will forget them quickly. Only knowledge that is used sticks in your mind. That is true. You will probably find it difficult to apply these suggestions all the time. I know because I wrote the book, and yet frequently I found it difficult to apply everything I advocated. For example, when you are displeased, it is much easier to criticize and condemn it than it is to try and understand the other person's viewpoint. It is frequently easier to find fault than to find praise. It is more natural to talk about what you want than to talk about what the other person wants, and so on and so on. So as you read the book, remember that you are not merely trying to acquire information, you are attempting to form new habits. Yes, you're attempting a new way of life that will require time and persistence and daily application. So refer to these pages often. Regard this as a working handbook on human relations. And whenever you are confronted with some specific problem, such as handling a child, winning your spouse to your way of thinking, or to satisfy an irritated customer, hesitate about doing the natural thing and the impulsive thing. This is usually wrong. Instead, turn to these pages and review paragraphs you have underscored. Then try new ways to watch them achieve magic for you. Offer your spouse, your child, or some business associate a dime or a dollar every time he or she catches you violating a certain principle, to make a lively game out of mastering the rules. And that was number 7. 8. The president of an important Wall Street bank once described in a talk before one of my classes, a highly efficient system is used for self-improvement. This man had little formal schooling, yet he had become one of the most important financiers in America. And he confessed that he owed most of his success to the constant application of his homemade system. This is what he does. I'll put it in his own words as accurately as I can remember. For years, I have kept an engagement book showing all the appointments I had during the day. My family never made any plans for me on Saturday night, for the family knew that I had devoted a part of each Saturday evening to illuminating the process of self-examination and review and appraisal. After dinner, I went off by myself, opened my engagement book, and thought over all the interviews, discussions, and meetings that had taken place during the week, and I asked myself, what mistakes did I make at the time? What did I do that was right? And in what way could I have improved my performance? I often found myself this weekly review made me very unhappy. I was frequently astonished by the blunders. Of course, as the years passed, these blunders became less frequent. Sometimes I was inclined to pat myself on the back a little after one of these sessions. This system for self-analysis, self-education, and continued year after year did more to me than any one thing I have ever attempted. It helped me improve my ability to make decisions, and it aided me enormously in all my contacts with people. I cannot recommend it too highly. Why not use a similar system to check up on my application for the principles discussed in this book? If you do, two things will result. First, you will find yourself engaged in an educational process that is both intriguing and priceless. Second, you will find that your ability to meet and deal with people will grow enormously. 9. You will find at the end of this book several blank pages on which you record your triumphs and applications of these principles. Be specific. Give names, dates, results. Keeping such a record will inspire you to greater efforts, and how fascinating these entries will be when you chance upon them some evening years from now. In order to get the most out of this book, A. Develop a deep driving desire to master the principles of human relations. B. Read each chapter twice before going on to the next one. C. As you read, stop frequently to ask yourself how you can apply each suggestion. D. Underscore each important idea. E. Review this book each month. F. Apply these principles at every opportunity. Use this volume as a working handbook to help you solve your daily problems. G. Make a lively game out of your learning by offering some friend a dime or dollar every time he or she catches you violating one of these principles. H. Check up each week on the progress you're making. Ask yourself, what mistakes have you made? What improvement? What lessons have you learned for the future? Keep notes on the back of this book showing how and when you have applied these principles. End of chapter. All right, so a little bit of review here. So Dale has outlined a few simple pointers about 9 consistent rules, of which aid in the process of learning, growth, and development. Yeah, learning, growth, and development. And what I can see here is that he's set himself a few things for self-review, to reflect on actions you've undertaken. So to be able to record, understand, and review and improve on things that you have done vastly increases your ability to do those particular tasks in future. This comes back to the learning process, setting a few goals and what are the pitfalls that you might run into, what are the risks, what are the constraints and key indicators for success, outlining them and obtaining them consistently, and reviewing the process on how to do that more efficiently is pretty crucial to the ability to succeed. Like if you don't have any plan or schedule or a way to record data, you are going to fail because you haven't identified what can stop you from attaining your goal. But first, what are the tasks you need to achieve to do it? I myself fail to do this constantly. Is probably the reason why I haven't obtained the success which I have fantasized about for years. All right. Part 1. Fundamental techniques in handling people. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. On May 7th, 1931, the most sensational manhunt New York had ever known had come to its climax. After years of search, Two-Gun Crowley, the killer, the gunman who didn't smoke or drink, was at bay, trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on West End Avenue. Excuse me. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege to his top-floor hideaway. They chopped holes in the roof. They tried to smoke out Crowley and the cop killer with tear gas. Then they mount their machine guns on surrounding buildings, and for more than an hour of New York's fine residential areas reverberated with a crack of pistol fire and a rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns. Crowley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired incessantly at police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle. Nothing like it had ever been seen on the sidewalks of New York. When Crowley was captured, Police Commissioner E.P. Mulrooney declared that Two-Gun Desperado was one of the most dangerous criminals ever encountered in the history of New York. He will kill, said Commissioner, at the drop of a feather. But how did Two-Gun Crowley regard himself? We know because while police were firing into his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern. And as he wrote, the blood flowing from his wounds left a crimson trail on the paper. In this letter, Crowley said, "Under my coat is a wary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." A short time before this, Crowley had been having a necking party with his girlfriend on a country road out on Long Island. Suddenly, a policeman walking up to the car and said, "Let me see your license." Without a word, Crowley drew his gun and cut the policeman down with a shower of lead. As the officer fell, Crowley leaped into the car, grabbed the officer's revolver, and fired another bullet into the prostrate body. And that was the killer who said, "Under my coat is a wary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." Crowley was sentenced to the electric chair. When he arrived at the death house in Sing Sing, did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No, he said, "This is what I get for defending myself." The point of the story is this: Two-Gun Crowley didn't blame himself for anything. Is that an unusual attitude among criminals? If you think so, listen to this. I had spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse, the existence of a hunted man. That's Al Capone speaking. Yes, America's most notorious public enemy. The most sinister gang leader who ever shot up Chicago. Capone didn't condemn himself. He actually regarded himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood public benefactor. And so did Dutch Schultz. Before he crumpled up under gangster bullets in Newark. Dutch Schultz, one of New York's most notorious rats, said in a newspaper interview that he was a public benefactor, and he believed it. I had some interesting correspondence with Louis Laws, who was warden of New York's infamous Sing Sing prison for many years, on this subject, and he declared that a few of the criminals in Sing Sing regard themselves as bad men. They are just as human as you and I. So they rationalize, they explain, they can tell you why they had crack a safe or be quick on the trigger finger. Most of them attempted to form a reasoning, fallacious or logical. Most of them attempt by a form of reasoning, fallacious or logical, to justify their antisocial acts. Even to themselves, consequently, stoutly maintaining that they should never have been imprisoned at all. If Al Capone, Two Gun Crowley, Dutch Schultz, and the desperate men and women behind prison walls don't blame themselves for anything, what about the people with whom you and I come in contact? John Wanamaker, founder of the stores that bear his name, once confessed, "I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gifts of intelligence." Wanamaker learned this lesson early, but I personally had to blunder through his old world for a third of a century before it had even begun to draw on me that 99 times out of 100 people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it just puts a person on the defensive and usually makes them strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts his sense of importance, and arouses resentment. B.F. Skinner, the world's famous psychologist, proved that through his experiments that the animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly and retain what it learns far more effectively than the animal punished for bad behavior. Later studies have shown that the same applies to humans. By criticizing, we do not make lasting changes that incur and often recur resentment. Hans Sale, another great psychologist, and much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation. The resentment that criticism engenders can demoralize employees, family members, and friends, and still not correct the situation that has been condemned. George B. Johnson of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety conductor for the engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to see that employees wear the hard hats whenever they are on the job on the field. He reported that whenever he comes across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority of the regulation that they must comply. As a result, they would get a sullen acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove their hats. He decided that such a different approach, the next time he found some of his workers not wearing a hard hat, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. He then reminded the men that in a pleasant tone of voice that suggested that it is always to be worn on the job. The result has increased in compliance with the regulation with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of the futility of the criticism bristling in the 1,000 pages of history. Take, for example, a famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt, President Taft, a quarrel that split the Republican Party, put Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and wrote bold, luminous lines across the First World War and altered the flow of history. Let's review the facts quickly. When Theodore Roosevelt stepped out into the White House in 1908, he supported Taft, who was elected president. Then Theodore Roosevelt went off to Africa to shoot lions. When he returned, he exploded. He denounced Taft for his conservatism, tried to secure nomination for a third term himself, formed the Bull Moose Party, and almost demolished the GOP. In the election that followed, William Howard Taft and the Republican Party carried only 2 states, Vermont and Utah, the most disastrous defeat the party had ever known. Theodore Roosevelt blamed Taft, but did President Taft blame himself? Of course not. With tears in his eyes, Taft said, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I've done. Who was to blame, Roosevelt or Taft? Frankly, I don't know, and I don't care. The point I'm trying to make is that all Theodore Roosevelt's criticism did persuade Taft that he was wrong, and merely made Taft strive to justify himself, to reiterate with tears in his eyes, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I've done. Or take the Teapot Dome oil scandal. He kept newspapers ringing in with indignation in the early 1920s and rocked the nation. Within the memory of living men, nothing like it had ever happened before in the American public life. Here, the bare facts of the scandal. Albert B. Force, Secretary of the Interior in Harding's cabinet, was entrusted with the leasings of government oil reserves at Elk Hill and Teapot Dome. Oil reserves that had been set aside for the future use of the Navy. Did the Secretary for permit competitive bidding? No, sir. He handled a fat, juicy contract outright to his friend Edward L. Dehaney. And what did Dehaney do? He gave Secretary for what he was pleased to call a loan of $100,000. Then, in a high-handed manner, Secretary Fall ordered the United States Marines into the district to drive off competitors whose adjacent wells were sapping oil from Elk Hill reserves. These competitors, driven off their ground at the ends of guns and bayonets, rushed into court and blew the lid off the Teapot Dome scandal. A stench arose so vile it ruined the Harding administration. Nauseated by an entire nation, threatened to wreck the Republican Party and put Albert B. Fall behind bars. Fall was condemned viciously, condemned as a few men in public life had ever been. Did he repent? Never. Years of Herbert Hoover intimated in the public speech that President Harding's death had been due mental anxiety and worry because of the friend had betrayed him. When Mrs. Fall heard that, he sprang from a chair, he swept, he shook her fist at fate and screamed, "What, Harding? Betrayed by Fall? No, my husband never betrayed anyone. This whole house full of gold would not tempt my husband to do wrong. He is the one who has been betrayed and led to the slaughter and crucified." There you are, human nature in action. Wrongdoers blaming everybody but themselves. We are all like that. So when you are tempted to criticize someone tomorrow, let's all remember Al Capone, Two Gun Crowley, and Albert Fall. Let's realize that the criticisms are like homing pigeons. They always return home. Let's realize that the person who we are going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us into return. Or, like the gentle Taft would say, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have. On the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was dying in a hall bedroom of a cheap lodging house across the street from Ford's Theatre, where John Wilkes Booth had shot him. Lincoln's long body lay stretched diagonally across a sagging bed that was too short for him. A cheap reproduction of Rosa Bonheur's famous painting of the Horse Fair hung above the bed, and the dismal gas jet flickered yellow sight. As Lincoln lay dying, Secretary of War Stanton said, "There lies the most perfect ruler of men the world has ever seen." And what was the secret Lincoln's success in dealing with people? I studied the life of Abraham Lincoln for 10 years and devoted all of 3 years to writing and rewriting the book entitled Lincoln the Unknown. I believe that I made as detailed and exhaustive a study of Lincoln's personality and home life as it is possible for any being that I make. I made a special study of Lincoln's method in dealing with people. Did he indulge in criticism? Oh, yes. As a young man of Pigeon Creek Valley of Indiana, he not only criticized, but he wrote letters and poems ridiculing people and dropped these letters on the country roads where they have been sure to be found. One of these letters arose resentments and burned for a lifetime. Even after Lincoln had become a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, he attacked his opponents openly in the letters published in the newspapers. But he did this just once too often. In the autumn of 1842, he ridiculed a vain, pugnacious politician by the name of James Shields. Lincoln lampooned him through an anonymous letter published in Springfield Journal. The town roared with laughter. Shields, sensitive and proud, bold with indignation, he found who wrote the letter, leapt onto his horse and started after Lincoln and challenged him to fight a duel. Lincoln didn't want to fight. He was opposed to dueling, but he couldn't get out of it and saving his honor. And to save his honor, he was given a choice of weapons. Since he had very long arms, he chose cavalry broadswords. He came and took lessons in sword fighting from a West Point graduate and so appointed a day. He and Shields met on a sandbar in Mississippi River and prepared to fight to the death, but at the last minute, the seconds interrupted and stopped the duel. That was the most lurid personal incident of Lincoln's life. It taught him an invaluable lesson in the art of dealing with people. Never again did he write an insulting letter. Never again did he ridicule anyone. And from that time, he almost never criticized anybody for anything. Time after time during Civil War, Lincoln put on a new general at the head of the Army of Potomac, and each one in turn, McClellan, Pope, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, blundered tragically and drove Lincoln to pacing the floor in despair. Half the nation savagely condemned those incompetent generals, but Lincoln, with malice towards none, with charity for all, held his peace. And one of his favorite quotations was, "Judge not that ye be not judged." And when Mrs. Lincoln and others spoke harshly of Southern people, Lincoln replied, "Don't criticize them for what he would have been in similar circumstances." Yet if any man had the occasion to criticize, surely it was Lincoln. Let's take just one illustration. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought during the first 3 days of July 1863. During the night of July 4th, Lee began to retreat southward while storm clouds deluged with the country of rain. When Lee reached the Potomac with his defeated army, he found a swollen and impassable river in front of him. A victorious Union army behind him, Lee was entrapped. Saw that here was a golden heaven-sent opportunity to capture Lee's army and end the war immediately. So, with a surge of high hope, Lincoln ordered Meade not to call a council of war, but to attack Lee immediately. Lincoln telegraphed his orders and sent a special messenger to Meade, demanding immediate action. And what did General Meade do? He did the very opposite of what he was told. He called a council of war to direct violation of Lincoln's orders. He hesitated. He procrastinated. He telegraphed all manner of excuses. He refused point blank to attack Lee. Finally, the waters receded, and Lee escaped over the Potomac with his forces. Lincoln was furious. What does this mean? Lincoln cried to his son Robert, "Great God, what does this mean? We had them within our grasp and only stretched forth our hands that they were ours, yet nothing of what I could say and do could make the army move. Under the circumstances, almost any general would have defeated Lee. If I had gone up there, I could have whipped him myself." In bitter disappointment, Lincoln sat down and wrote Meade his letter. And remember, at this point of his life, Lincoln was extremely conservative and restrained in his phraseology. So this letter coming from Lincoln in 1863 was tantamount to the severest rebuke. "My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within easy grasp, and to have closed upon him in connection with our late successes, to have ended the war as the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how could you possibly do so south of the river, when you take with you the very few, no more than 2/3 of the force you had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect that I do not expect that you can now effect much. With golden opportunity is gone, I am distressed immeasurably because of it." What do you suppose Meade did when he read the letter? Meade never saw the letter. Lincoln never mailed it. It was found among his papers after his death. My guess is, and this is the only guess, that after writing the letter, Lincoln looked out the window and said to himself, "Just a minute, maybe I ought not to be so hasty. It is easy enough for me to sit here in the quiet of the White House and order Meade to attack. But if I had been up at Gettysburg and I had seen as much blood as Meade had seen during the last week, and if my ears had pierced with the screams and shrieks of the wounded and dying, maybe I wouldn't have been so anxious to attack either. If I had Meade's timid temperament, perhaps I would have done just what he had done. Anyhow, it is the water under the bridge now. If I send this letter, it will relieve my feelings, but it will make Meade try to justify himself. It will make him condemn me. It will arouse hard feelings, impair all further usefulness as a commander, and perhaps force him to resign from the army." So, as I have already said, Lincoln put the letter aside, for he had learned by bitter experience that sharp criticisms and rebukes almost invariably end in futility. Theodore Roosevelt said that when he, as president, was confronted by a perplexing problem, he used to lean back and forth and look up at a large painting of Lincoln, which hung above his desk in the White House, and ask himself, what would Lincoln do if he were in my shoes? How would he solve the problem? Next time we are tempted to admonish somebody, let's pull a $5 bill out from our pocket and look at Lincoln's picture on the bill. Would Lincoln have handled this problem if he had it? Mark Twain lost his temper occasionally and wrote letters that turned the paper brown. For example, he once wrote to a man that he had roused his ire, the thing for you is a burial permit. You only have to speak and I will see that you get it. Another occasion that he wrote to an editor about proofreaders' attempt to improve my spelling and punctuation, he set the matter according to my company hereafter and see that proofreaders retain his suggestion and a much of his decayed brain. Just a moment. The writing of these stinging letters made Mark Twain feel better. They allowed him to blow off steam, and the letters didn't do any real harm because Mark's wife secretly left them out of the mail. They were never sent. Do you know someone who would like to change and regulate and improve? Good. That is fine. I am in all favor of it. Why not begin on yourself? From a purely selfish standpoint, there is a lot more profitable in trying to improve others, yes, and a lot less dangerous. Don't complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof, said Confucius, when your own doorstep is unclean. When I was still young and trying to impress people, I wrote a foolish letter to Richard Harding Davis, an author who once loomed large on the literary horizon of America. I was preparing a magazine article to authors, and I asked Davis to tell me about his method of work. A few weeks earlier, I had received a letter from someone with this notation at the bottom: dictated but not read. I was quite impressed. I felt that the writer must be very big, busy, and important. I wasn't the slightest bit busy, but I was eager to make an impression on Richard Harding Davis, so I ended up in short notes with words dictated but not read. He never troubled to answer the letter. He simply returned it to me with a scribble across the bottom. Your bad manners are exceeded only by your bad manners. True, I had blundered, and perhaps I deserved this rebuke. But being human, I resented it. I resented it so sharply that when I read that the death of Richard Harding Davis 10 years later was the one thought that still persisted on my mind. I am ashamed to admit was the hurt he had given to me. If you want to stare at resentment and rankle across decades and endure until my death, that is indulged little stinging criticism. Oh, fuck, honestly, I don't think I can continue. There's only a few pages left in that, but I'm getting lightheaded, eh? Oh, I could only do this for about an hour and 10 minutes. I need a break. So we're at page 42. I'll continue in the next live session. Thanks for joining in. I don't think anyone joined, but, that's okay. I enjoyed reading this, but I have only a limited capacity to read audiobooks. Next time.